Hi, welcome. I'm Taryn and thank you for joining me for your intuitive movement workshop, which is the second workshop in the Body Conscious series. Now, first of all, I want to acknowledge that I have my little heater over here because I got quite cold towards the end of the recording of the first workshop. So if you do hear a little buzzing noise in the background, that's what it is. So I acknowledge and apologise, but I felt it was important to keep myself warm. And for this workshop, I am going to be doing quite a bit of speaking. And although intuitive movement you would think that I would be guiding you through more movement practices, because that's the way I like to teach, is by allowing you to experience things in your body and let your body show you, basically, which is how we do experience intuitive movement. But what I will share with you are some principles and some mindsets around intuitive movement, and then you can choose to take what feels good for you and then implement that into how you move your body and your movement practices. And so I'm mindful that the women who we have coming into these workshops are going to have a range of views and experiences with movement and likes and dislikes around movement. So I'll share with you first a little bit of my experience, so you have a bit of background and understanding, and also share with you what I find with the women who I work with, their most common experiences and some of the mindset shifts that we work with to help them approach movement differently. So you might want to grab yourself like a journal or something like that. It doesn't have to be fancy and pretty. If you have one like that, by all means grab it, and perhaps you want to press pause and listen to a bit and maybe write a few things down, and then keep doing that sort of process so that you can have a few points to perhaps reflect upon and then experience or experiment with in your movement practices. So the first thing I would like to talk to is movement, and why do I talk to movement rather than exercise? And that might be a good question to begin with, and ask yourself what feels more resonant for you if you consider movement and if you consider exercise, and what meaning do you attach or have towards those two words, and how would you feel in your body if you were to be exercising versus moving? So for me, exercise really felt prescriptive. It felt like I had to do a number of repetitions for a particular time. It felt very regimented, timetabled, in a box, had to be working towards something, increased strength, or for me personally, a particular triathlon goal or running goal or whatever that might be, versus movement felt more experimental, more playful, more of, how does this feel in my body? What does my body feel like when I approach movement like this? Very much more listening in and allowing my body to guide me and show me the way, and allow my level of energy to show me the way, and make it more about being in communication with my body and experiencing my body, rather than trying to fix something or shift something or do it for another tick in the box of towards health and well-being. I need to exercise my body. Whereas this is more like I get to experience and enjoy my body through movement practice that I love and enjoy. So I grew up doing gymnastics, and so which meant 20 plus, closer to 30 hours a week of training each week as a young child, a very disciplined practice, very much push your body to the limits, very much when you're tired, you still show up and you do all of the things. There wasn't much room for movement in the momentum and the change in how you're feeling. And yes, there was always an acknowledgement from coaches and things like that, that not every day that you show up are you going to perform the same and be able to put you put 100% in of what you've got that day. But it was very much regimented, timetabled, prescriptive, and there was certainly a lot of experimenting to try and learn new skills and things like that. But I hadn't experienced perhaps so much of the rest, restore, recovery, and had such an emphasis on that in my growing up and my relationship to movement as a child. So self-motivation, self-discipline, showing up, consistency, all of those things that some of us would have challenges with. I certainly am not one of those people. But what I do find more challenging and more difficult is the rest, restore, recovery. And so I moved from gymnastics to then running, and then I went from running and lots of injuries to then triathlon, because triathlon at least gave me a bit more variety in my movement, not the constant pounding on the pavement, which meant I could give my body some rest of, I ended up with stress fractures in my legs and things like that. So I could shift away from that. But then when you add 3 sports in, swimming, riding and running, then that gives you less opportunity for real rest rather than relative rest and a swim recovery, which was still, a 3-kilometre swim or something like that. And so after having my second child, I experienced a lot of pelvic pain, and I also had a much slower transition back into fitness. Whereas after my first birth, I was running very comfortably after 6 weeks, and I was representing Australia in the in the World Triathlon Championships, age group World Triathlon Championships, at about, my daughter was 16 months old. And so, as a new mum, first baby, breastfeeding, all of the things, was still able to, show up and perform at this very high level, which I don't wrong. There is nothing wrong with that. But even in that experience, rest and recovery was not a priority. It was showing up and doing the things. And then when I experienced this incredible pelvic pain and needing to take a more gentle approach towards movement and exercise, luckily I have a very broad range of movement that I like and that I love and enjoy. And going to the gym, going to Pilates, going to yoga, all of those things, just making up a circuit class on things like that, that all does, and I am aware of this, come with ease for me, because I have, movement has been ingrained in my body and in my life since I was very little and very young. But what I found was, when I was not able to move my body in the ways that I had always been used to, so hard and fast, consistent, all of those things, and challenging and, pushing to the limits, when I wasn't at that level, it was very challenging for me to meet myself where I was. And I felt this huge disappointment, this disconnection from my body. I felt like my body was failing me. I felt like no matter what I was doing, where I was working towards, I wasn't improving because, to be honest, I wanted to just run and run fast, and I wanted to lift the heavy weights, and I wanted to do those things. But what the experience of pelvic pain gifted me was this opportunity to create a new relationship with my entire body. Now, I have always been like, I love health and well-being and my being in my body, but I've always been very critical of my body and had this very functional view of my body. One, I saw my body for what it could do and what it could achieve, and the challenges that it could master was part of what I attached to, I guess, my self-worth. But I also had this aesthetic component of what my body should look like. When you're an athlete your entire life, you're used to looking like an athlete, and then of course when our body morphs and changes and becomes, you know, more feminine as we grow older, more curvaceous, and as we've had children and things shift and change, what my body looks like has always been quite a challenge for me, particularly after I finished up with gymnastics and then, you know, went through puberty and all those transition phases that women go through. So I experienced bulimia when I was in grade 11 and 12 because it felt like this way I could control around how my body looked. And yes, I went on to some antidepressants, and I started to shift my relationship with food and movement and exercise. But it was really this pelvic pain experience where I really started to look at my relationship with my body and the language that I use in my head and how I talk to myself around my body. And it was through this transition of changing my perspective around movement and then also embodying those changes that I eventually learnt how to be in my body as it was or as it is, and enjoy the experience of my body as it is today, rather than moving my body to try and fix something or change something. And even if it's not a fix or a change, it's to, like, you know, I'm doing this so that I don't put on weight, for example. And so that way of looking at movement and exercise is very different to, I'm doing this movement because I get to move my body and I love my body and I want to actually experience my body through this movement and gift myself this time with just being with me. And so it's the perspective shift. And so the first thing I've asked you to think about was, you know, movement versus exercise, and what feels more resonant to you, and how would they look different, and how would they feel different for you. And then so the next thing to think about and consider then is, what is your intention behind your movement, or why do you move your body? Is it to feel connected to yourself and to experience your body, to feel that sweat and that, you know, that energetic rush and that detox sensation and all of the beautiful things that movement gives us? Or is it so I don't put on weight, so that I can look good for this event in 3 months' time, because I'm scared if I don't move hard and fast and high intensity that I'll lose strength or whatever it might be? And just start to, like, really look at your intention behind your movement. And I feel what I want to talk to right now is when I was in that phase of I wanted to do this, but my body was here. It was the moment that I accepted where my body was at and tuned into my body and what was available to me now and how can I work with that rather than trying to work against my body. So intuitive movement is really about body-led movement. It's about tuning into your own energy and letting that lead how you're moving. So often in the world that we live in, we move because, Monday, it's pump at the gym, so I'm doing pump. Tuesday's Pilates class. Wednesday, I don't sign up into anything, but I go for a run. And you've got this schedule. And even in a scheduled environment, you can invite some more intuitive and body-led movement by tuning into your body's energy and where it is at in this day, in this moment, and at your phase of your cycle. And when I'm talking about your cycle, yes, I'm talking about your menstrual cycle, but I'm also just talking about how you are in your overall cycle of life, like what phase you are in. If you're a mum breastfeeding and you're up 4 times in a night, that's a very different part of your cycle and phase of your life to, I've got a 3 and 5-year-old now, and we don't sleep through the night and they sleep in our bed and all the things. But I still have a little bit more time and space around movement in a lot of ways than I had previously. So it's looking at all the things, and not feeling guilty or bad or I missed a session and so now I have to make up a session, or I'd like to have a rest day but it's not in my schedule, or it's a rest day but resting makes me feel guilty, or whatever it might be. It's about more tuning into your body and allowing it to lead. And so letting that our natural cyclical nature to be reflected in our movement. So it's another sort of reflection question, how do you allow your natural rhythm and your natural cycle to be reflected in your movement? And how do you rest your body? And how do you feel about resting your body? Because for a lot of us, resting our body feels very scary and confronting. And for some of us, it's like that the movement is the more challenging, getting the motivation and the momentum to move. When we can do a simple body scan, tune into the body, how am I feeling emotionally, energetically, what is available in terms of my movement practices and time I've got, where do I want to invest my energy right now, and then moving from that place rather than moving from a place of I should be up to this and I should be looking like that and I should be able to do this. And so I wanted to go back to, I've got a lot to say on this obviously, the time when I needed to meet my body where it was at, because this is really important for us in our transition phases, whether it's that you've experienced an injury and now you need to be able to move your body differently, or you have given birth recently and you're rebuilding your deep core and your pelvic floor and now you're needing to move your body in different ways. Maybe something's happened in your life. Maybe it's just that we've had this pandemic and what was available to you in terms of your gym membership or your swimming subscription, whatever that would be called, your pool access has been changed. When something changes, whether internally or environmentally around us, we need to be able to access, or it's healthy and if good, feels good to be able to access more ways of moving our body and more ways of finding the feelings that we want to feel in our body. And so for me, that personally was acceptance of where I'm at, but also finding what was hard and finding the edge, like I like challenge, so finding the edge of challenge but in a softer way. And so for me, the challenge was slower movement, being in the more softness and the stillness, doing the slow strengthening, you know, the more traditional deep core work and that sort of thing. And most importantly, having an inquiry, self-inquiry, curiosity around movement, and like actually like, oh, how does this feel in my body versus this, and letting my body lead the movement rather than my mind trying to say, this is how we want to move our body, and so you've got to catch up to the mind. So when we have more variability in our movement, we have some ways to access that. And variability comes down to, it's one, a mindset thing, so working with your internal energy. So for example, variability in running. Like it's the same movement and it's the same exercise, but we can give variability to our running by, you know, changing the pace, changing the distance, changing the intention behind the running. Maybe it's adding some music, and maybe it's making it more mindful run, and, you know, making it about observing or observing the breath. So there's different ways you can slow it down, you can speed it up, you can change the distance and the time, and use those, you know, more traditional or what we would be coaching ways of pace and distance and time and repetitions, speed, all of those things, but also our internal processing of what this movement means to me and how it feels in my body, and what parts of me am I connecting to during the movement. And so you can find a little bit more variability by finding new mindsets, new ways of thinking, new parts of yourself to access, and new parts of yourself to become curious about. But also you can find variability, say for me, I like to run, through changing the actual, the movement as a whole. So rather than running, because that's not available to me right now, in my example of pelvic pain, I can find things that maybe help me to work towards my running, but I'm not running. So it was the deep core strengthening, the single leg squats, the walk, you know, longer distances, bit of uphill walking, hiking, things like that. But in our movement variability too, I really love what that gifted me in the sense of when we have, and knowing this, of when we have more variety in our movement and variability and mind flexibility. So when we're really rigid around what our exercise or movement has to look like, and you know, this, you know, warrior one pose has to look like this, it has to be this alignment, and I have to hold it for this amount of time, and it needs to feel like this, which there's nothing wrong with that, and don't get me wrong, there is a lot to be, there's a lot there to access when we've got that consistency of, you know, really practicing something till we've mastered it. But this is just a different perspective that I want to offer, and you can take and leave anything, is that what if in our, you know, warrior one pose, for example, we just changed our foot placement a little bit, or changed our arm movement, or let it be about, oh, let's lean forward or backward a little bit, and just experimenting with your body. Like, it's the intuitive movement is about the tuning in and how does this feel differently, and tuning into, yeah, what feels different when I move my body in a different way, and less about somebody telling you how it should be and what a movement should look like, and more about experiencing and experimenting with how it feels. And this is important. I've become aware of and learnt over my time with women, is that as our body transitions and changes, and particularly as our deep core changes and our pelvic floor changes, how we maybe traditionally teach something for like a squat, for example, and you have to have your pelvis here, and you have to have your chest here, and you have to do this, and your legs need to be this distance apart, and that sort of thing. And we give so many cues of what it has to look like, but what if that actually aggravates your prolapse, for example? And so we need to find a new way of moving and experimenting with your body so that you can find a way that it feels comfortable for you, for example. Some women, it might be how you skip, for example, and how you've always skipped with your chest up and really high and bouncy, and that makes you incontinent. And when we just shift your rib cage down and we focus on really like soft landing, but really about rib cage and pelvic position, which might feel really quite strange as leaning forward or something like that, for example, but it means that you don't leak. And so, not that intuitive movement is about pelvic health and not leaking and that sort of thing. It can be, but what we invite is just more variety, more flexibility, more fluidity into our movement. And what that then gives us also is more flexibility and fluidity into how we approach our world as a whole. So, for example, I'm going to use this COVID, for example. It's changed how we might have engaged in our life and experienced our life, but if we really have practiced having an open mind and flexibility and variety, and we've practiced that problem solving, but I'm going to lead with the feeling of what feels good and what feels nourishing. That's very different to I'm very rigid and I'm very structured and it has to look like this and it doesn't look like this, and now what am I going to do? And I want to be in control of something that I cannot control. And it just gives us that more softer approach, I guess, to not only our movement but to our world as well. And so there is no right or wrong way to go about intuitive movement, because that's the whole thing, right, is that you are and your body is the leader. And so what feels good, what feels in tune, what feels aligned, what matches your rhythm, and using your momentum when it is there and resting when it's not, that is you doing your way and letting your body lead. And so I will wrap it up soon. But the last thing I want to talk to is, the rest side of things. And just as we tune into the movement and the purpose of the movement and the intention behind the movement and the relationship to the movement, we also explore our relationship to rest and our relationship to the purpose of rest, and what do we see the purpose of rest as, and how do we nourish our body and allow that cyclical nature to be there. For me personally, my relationship to rest was that it was scary, that it wasn't practical, that it wasn't building upon, it wasn't getting me to the next part of where I wanted to be. But in that approach, I was also feeling very depleted in my energy stores, and it was very anxious. Like when a rest day came into my schedule, I felt like, oh, I should just maybe do something, because if I don't do something, I don't feel like I'm using my time wisely. And so I then would end up doing some kind of movement practice, even if I tried to do it slow. So I really had to trust to shift to something else. And the something else was inviting the rest. And it was scary. And it started with like, let's just sit for a few minutes and like just sit and rest, be here, maybe sit and sip my cup of tea and actually get to the bottom of the cup of tea before I move my body from here. It was like really going, each time I stepped into my movement practice, an actual focused body scan where I needed to breathe into my body, scan from my head to toe, very slowly and intentionally ask my body, how am I feeling? Where is my energy at? What am I available for today? And what would give me energetic nourishment? And then literally moving my body from there. And as I started to see the value in the rest, it's almost like then I was like, wow, I can't get enough of this. Which sounds like the scary bit, because that's what a lot of women fear, right? Is that if we lean into the rest, we'll realize how much what we require. And then when we start doing that, then everything falls away and then it'll pile up, and then we'll turn around and be like, oh my gosh, I cannot deal with this. Whereas, in actual truth, as we allow ourselves to rest, recover, reset, revitalize, fill ourselves back up, we are more capable of doing the things with just that more calm, less anxiety, more fluidity, more focus. But also, it gives us that clarity of where we do want to invest our energy and our time, and what we do want to give ourselves to. But also what I find with the rest is that it's still all getting done, but it just feels better and it feels good. And it is the law of attraction. When you're sensing that ease and that joy and that nourishment in your body, then that's what's gifted back to you. And all of the things that feel too hard or grindy, effortful, they start to either, you realize, these things are not my things, like that I don't want to hand over my energy to them, and then you actually can become more clear around what you value and what you want to invest your energy and time in. Or you have just such a different mindset that when you approach these things that used to feel hard, because you're approaching more with self-kindness, self-curiosity, a compassion, a gentleness, you just very different in how you approach your body and yourself, so that all of this starts to soften. And then so as you soften internally, all the things externally just don't ramp you up so much and make life so challenging and difficult. So that's, it's all like, I'm a mover, so my approach to movement was how I could access a lot of the changes that I wanted to make around how I approach myself and my body. But even if you're not a mover, if we focus on what feels good, what's my intention, what would feel connected for me, that is more likely to give you the motivation and the momentum than I have to do this, and someone said this would be good for my body, and I hate running, but I'm going to have to do it because that's apparently the best way to lose weight, and I need to lose 5 kilos in 3 months, so that's what I've got to do. So when you connect to what would feel good, what do I love, what lights me up, what brings me joy in my body, how would I like to connect and experience my body, what would that look like and what would that feel like, that's when we can go, that is my pathway, and trusting your body's guidance. It's okay to do something that you like and that you love. And yes, we want to challenge and find our edges and, you know, build some strength and things like that. But that can be something that we not work towards, but if the access point is finding the ease, then find the ease. If you already mastered the challenge of finding your edges and da-da-da, which I had, for example, allowing yourself to find the ease so that you can find more ease in your life as a whole is also really beautiful. So this is about inquiry. What does movement mean to me? What would I like it to feel like? What would I like to feel in my body? How can I access that? And how can I practice that so that I become more practiced at feeling that in my body more often, and therefore creating a more positive relationship with my body as a whole. Alright, so that is my thoughts around intuitive movement. Remember, take and leave anything that I say. If it feels good, yes. If it feels like a no, that's okay as well. Experiment with your body, experiment with some of these principles, and if you have any questions or if you would like to share your experience, remember that I'm here on the Facebook, the Instagram, or the Voxer. Thank you so much. I look forward to connecting with you either during the week or at our next workshop. See ya.